Welcome to Morganable, where we serve you with authentic news, stories, documentaries, updates, and Martin-style insights on our society and the larger world. And more importantly, about places that fall under the radar of the mainstream media machinery. We invite you to embark on this exciting journey of enlightenment with us. Morganable, your vehicle of enlightenment.
On April 1995, an act of unspeakable violence rocked Oklahoma City, leaving behind a legacy of pain, resilience, and profound transformation. The Oklahoma City bombing, carried out by Timothy McVeigh, became one of the deadliest domestic terrorist attacks in U.S. history. The story of that day is not just one of destruction, but also of unwavering courage, humanity, and the indomitable spirit of a community determined to heal through the eyes of those who were the survivors, law enforcement officers, and investigators. A gripping narrative unfolds, revealing the raw emotions, heroic actions, and lasting impact of the bombing on Oklahoma City and beyond. This documentary focuses on the personal experiences of survivors, law enforcement, and the emotional and social impact the tragedy had on Oklahoma City. The city bombing, which occurred on April 19, 1995, was a devastating one. It stands as one of the deadliest attacks in the U.S. history, and its impact is still felt today. The bombing was carried out by Timothy, a former U.S. Army soldier, and his accomplice Terry Nichols. The motivation was rooted in a deep-seated anti-government ideology, especially in response to the events surrounding the 1993 Waco siege and the 1992 Ruby Ridge standoff, both of which involved heavy law enforcement actions and were viewed by McVeigh and others as examples of government overreach. Let's talk about the lead up to the bombing. Timothy McVeigh had been an outspoken critic of the U.S. government for years, particularly after the events at Waco, Texas, where a standoff between the FBI and Branch Davidians led to a deadly fire that killed 76 people, including David Koresh, the leader of the religious group. McVeigh saw the government's actions at Waco as an abuse of power and a violation of citizens' rights. He also harbored similar resentment towards the 1992 incident at Ruby Ridge, where an armed confrontation between the FBI and Randy Weaver, a man accused of firearms violations, led to the deaths of his wife, son, and a U.S. Marshal. In McVeigh's mind, the government was a threat to individual freedoms, and he believed that violent resistance was necessary. He became increasingly radicalized and began planning the Oklahoma City bombing as an act of retaliation against what he saw as the government's oppressive actions. The Murrah Building in Oklahoma City was chosen as the target for its symbolic value. It housed several government agencies, including the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives (ATF), which McVeigh held responsible for the Waco incident. Let's talk about the bombing. On the morning of April 19, 1995, McVeigh rented a yellow Rigida truck and loaded it with a massive bomb made of fertilizer and fuel oil that he had carefully constructed over several weeks. The truck contained over 5,000 pounds of explosives and was capable of causing widespread destruction. He and his accomplice Terry Nichols drove the truck from their home in Kansas to Oklahoma City, where they intended to carry out their attack. Around 9 on the fateful morning, McVeigh parked the truck in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, which was located in the heart of Oklahoma City. He exited the vehicle, ignited the fuse, and quickly walked away. At 9:02 in the morning, the bomb exploded, creating a massive shock wave that shook the city. The explosion was so powerful that it completely destroyed the north side of the Murrah Building, leveling parts of the structure. The force of the blast sent debris flying for blocks, shattering windows and causing buildings miles away to shake. The impact was felt across the city, and the sound of the explosion could be heard from miles. Inside the building at the time of the explosion were 167 people, including government employees, civilians, and a daycare center full of children. The blast killed 168 people in total, including 19 children, who were among the youngest victims. The children were in the daycare center located on the second floor of the building when the bomb went off. In addition, over 600 people were injured, many of them seriously. The aftermath of the bombing was chaotic. Emergency responders from across Oklahoma City rushed to the scene, working tirelessly to rescue survivors and tend to the wounded. Firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and ordinary citizens joined forces to search through the rubble for any signs of life. The recovery efforts continued for days, with rescuers pulling people from the wreckage, often in dire conditions. Amid the chaos, there was a sense of unity and determination as the community rallied together to support the victims and their families. Let's talk about the investigation. In the immediate aftermath of the bombing, authorities launched an extensive investigation to identify the perpetrators. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to collect evidence, interview witnesses, and piece together the events surrounding the attack. One crucial clue came from a witness who reported seeing a man near the site of the explosion just before the blast occurred. Descriptions of the suspect were circulated, and investigators began to focus on a man who had been seen driving a yellow Ryder truck that matched the one used in the bombing. The breakthrough in the case came when an Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper named Charlie Hunger stopped the vehicle matching the description of McVeigh's truck on the day of the bombing. McVeigh, who was driving the truck, was arrested for a routine traffic violation and was later connected to the bombing. When authorities searched McVeigh's vehicle and clothing, they discovered traces of explosives, specifically PATN, which confirmed his involvement in the attack. McVeigh was arrested and charged with the bombing. Investigators also arrested his accomplice Terry Nichols, who had helped McVeigh plan and execute the attack. In the following weeks, it was revealed that McVeigh had carefully planned the bombing, selecting the Murrah Building as a symbol of government power. The bombing was meant to send a message to the US government about 10 years of overreach and tyranny. Let's delve into the issues of the trial and convictions of McVeigh. McVeigh's trial was a national speculation, with many people eager to see him brought to justice for his horrific actions. In 1997, McVeigh was convicted of 11 counts, including murder and conspiracy, for his role in the bombing. His trial and conviction were seen as victory for justice, but it also left many people with lingering questions about the state of domestic terrorism in the United States. Terry Nichols, McVeigh's accomplice, was also tried for his role in the bombing. Nichols was convicted of conspiracy and 8 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of the people in the Murrah Building. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. McVeigh, who had no remorse for his actions, was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He was executed on June 11, 2001 at Indiana. His execution brought closure to many victims' families, but also reignites debate over the death penalty and the nature of domestic terrorism. Let's talk about the Oklahoma City National Memorial, commemorated on every April 19 in the years following the bombing. Oklahoma City was determined to honor the victims and ensure that memories would never fade. In 2000, the Oklahoma City National Memorial Day was dedicated at the site of the Murrah Building. The memorial consists of a reflecting pole, a field of empty chairs representing the victims, and the survivor tree, which withstood the blast and became a symbol of resilience and hope. The memorial stands as a tribute to those who lost their lives in the bombing and a reminder of the enduring spirit of the community. It also serves as a powerful symbol of the dangers of the extremism and the importance of fighting for peace and justice. Visitors to the memorial can reflect on the events of that tragic day and pay their respects to the victims, many of whom were innocent civilians. The legacy of the Oklahoma City bombing. The Oklahoma City bombing had a profound impact on the nation. It forced the country to confront the reality of domestic terrorism and the potential for violence from within its own borders. The attack also led to changes in U.S. law enforcement as agencies took steps to improve their ability to identify and prevent domestic terrorist acts. The bombing prompted the passage of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, which aimed aimed to enhance the government's ability to combat terrorism and improve law enforcement coordination. In Oklahoma City, the bomb left an indelible mark on the community. Survivors and families of victims struggled with the pain of loss, but they also found strength in one another. The city embraced its resilience, and the phrase, "the Oklahoma Standard," emerged, symbolizing the kindness and generosity that people showed to one another in the wake of the tragedy. The sense of unity that emerged after bombing was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Today, the memory of the Oklahoma City bombing remains a somber part of U.S. history. It serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of hatred and extremism, as well as the importance of standing together in the face of adversity. We shall talk about the indelible mark on those who experienced it firsthand. Barry Black, a special agent with the FBI, was on the ground during the Oklahoma City bombing. As he shared his powerful experience, he said the moment he arrived at the scene around 9:30 in the morning or 9:35 in the morning, it was obvious this was a major and unique event. Having been in Waco during the first World Trade Center bombing, he already had a sense of how significant this was, and though they didn't know everything at the time, he later realized how Timothy McVeigh's perception of Waco played into the motivation behind the attack. Barry described the situation vividly. Fires were still burning when he got there, people were trapped on the upper floors, and emergency teams were already trying to rescue as many as they could. There were wounded people everywhere, some badly hurt, others just walking around in shock. And even though it was emotional, he said everyone had a job to do. You couldn't let emotions take over. As
you look at this, you show up on a scene like that, and clearly it's huge. I was in Waco during the first Trade Center bombing. And as a bomb technician, you kind of keep track of those sorts of things. So this was clearly, from inception, a unique and major event. How it tied into McVeigh's perception of Waco, and that, linking those two things together was unusual, which of course we learned later.
The bomb technician, he had to trust that the paramedics, firefighters, and others would handle their roles while he focused on his. He talked about how hard it was to even leave the site. They spent so much time there that the Red Cross would bring them hot food. It felt like the rest of the world was moving on outside of the space, but inside they were living in a bubble of intensity. He mentioned how his wife told him about people, friends he hadn't heard from in years, calling just to check in and make sure they were okay. One of the most touching parts of what he shared was about the overwhelming community support. He said that when there were a call for supplies like gloves or boots, people showed up with truckloads. Restaurants wouldn't let rescue workers pay for meals. Someone had always already paid. It became known as the Oklahoma Standard, and to this day, even rescuers from other states still talk about how unforgettable that kindness was. Barry also pointed out how long and intense the investigation really was. This wasn't like a TV crime show. It took over 1 million man-hours, with 1,400 people working nearly 814 days to gather everything needed for the case. He made 3 trips to Denver for the trial, and he admitted it was hard on the families, the victims, and even on their own families too. But in the end, he said he was proud of how everything worked out. The justice system did its job. Everyone got a fair trial. The jury, the judge, everyone handled things the right way, and to him, that was something that really mattered. Florence Rogers, a survivor of the Oklahoma City bombing, shared a deeply personal experience from that harrowing day. As the manager of the credit union, she recalled how the space was always bustling with people, employees, visitors, and customers coming in to draw money, apply for loans, or simply have a chat. That morning was no different. She had just returned from a vacation and brought cruise pictures to share with her team. By 8:20 in the morning, she was seated with her staff, engaged in a routine meeting. She remembered turning to her computer to prepare for the next item on the agenda while her team chatted about copying documents and prepping materials for an audit. Just as she leaned back in her chair, everything changed. The bomb went off.
So I got there as early as I could that morning, and I'd had all my cruise pictures from my vacation the week before. I had them all put in there, and I was going to share all those with these gals when we met that morning. So we didn't get started on this meeting until about 8:20 that morning. And I would turn around and look at my computer screen at the next item that we were to discuss. And I'd rear back in my chair and let them chat about, well, who's going to copy this, who's going to do this, get this ready for the banking department so they could hurry with their audit. I just turned around in my chair and kind of reared back and was getting ready to discuss the next item that I mentioned when the bomb went off.
In what felt like only a few seconds, her entire world shattered. The women who had been in the room with her vanished. At first, she thought they had run out and left her behind. She called out to them, panicking, but the haunting reality soon set in. They were gone. Later, she learned that when the bomb detonated, the 7 floors above had collapsed into what became known as the pit, where her staff had been taken in an instant. Silence fell over the scene. Papers fluttered in the air. Glass had shattered and flown blocks away, but now there was only quiet. Florence had been thrown to the ground and found herself wedged tightly into a small space surrounded by debris. She later discovered that just 18 inches of exterior wall had remained intact, likely what saved her life. Her desk teetered at an angle above the void where her employees had fallen. At first, she thought it must have been a gas explosion, but when authorities began saying it was a bomb, the shock deepened. People often asked her what went through her mind as she witnessed the devastation. She recalled thinking it felt like a bad movie. She had always hated those films where buildings and bridges are blown up for entertainment, and in that surreal moment, she just wanted to get up and escape. Many asked if she had been angry. Her answer was always the same. She chose not to be. Anger, she said, would have only hurt her more. The tragedy changed her life. She retired earlier than planned. The pain of losing 80 employees who had given a combined 128 years of service lingered deeply. Some were likely daughters to her, women who had stood by her for decades. She carried the ache of knowing the families would never share the joys of growing older together, joys she continued to live through, like welcoming great-grandchildren. Florence believed that God had a reason for sparing her. At the time of the bombing, she was just 59 years old. 2 decades later, she had gray hair, great-grandbabies, and new memories, a life beyond the office walls. In her talks, she always left people with one powerful message. She would say, don't ever miss an opportunity to tell the people you love that you love them, because you never know when you might not come home from an ordinary day at work. Let's talk about another person, Jim Norman, one of the case agents in the Oklahoma City bombing investigation, narrated how they started piecing things together. He said they found out that an Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper had actually made an inquiry on the Timothy McVeigh within about 90 minutes of the bombing. So one of the task force members at ATF agent named Mark M reached out to the Highway Patrol to identify who made the inquiry using the badge number that was recorded. That badge number turned out to belong to a trooper named Charlie Hunger. Once they had Hunger's name, they contacted him and learned how things unfolded. Hunger had been heading south toward Oklahoma City to assist after the dispatcher called for all available troopers, but then he got a call to discontinue, so he turned around on Interstate 35, about 62 miles north of the city. As he was heading back north, a yellow Marquis passed him, missing its rear license plate. Hunger pulled the car over. The driver, who turned out to be McVeigh, got out immediately, but Hunger ordered him to stay by his door. Hunger then approached him carefully and told him to back up toward him. As McVeigh did, Hunger noticed a bug under his left jacket. When he reached out and grabbed it, McVeigh said, "It is a gun and it is loaded." Hunger, with his own gun next to McVeigh's head, calmly responded, "So is mine." He disarmed McVeigh, who was carrying armor-piercing rounds and had a K-bar knife hidden as well. Hunger took him in custody and brought him to the Noble City jail in Perry, Oklahoma. When the investigators followed up, Hanger said he didn't know what had happened to McVeigh, whether he was still in custody or had already been released. So
we had one of the people working on our task force, an ATF agent named Mark Mahalik, contact the Highway Patrol and identify the person whose badge number was in that inquiry. Because when you make an inquiry, you have to list an identifier for yourself as a law enforcement official. And so he found out that that badge number belonged to a trooper named Charlie Hanger. And so once we had Hanger's name, we had someone contact him, and they found out that Hanger had been heading south toward Oklahoma City based on a Highway Patrol dispatcher call for all available troopers to head to Oklahoma City to assist. He had gotten a discontinue. He was about 62 miles north of Oklahoma City, and he turned around in the median on Interstate 35. And as he's starting to head back north, he's passed by this yellow Mercury Marquis that's missing its rear license plate. And so he pulls that car over, and the driver gets out of the car, and Hanger has to order him to stay by the door of his car. And so Hanger gets out, tells the guy to back up toward him, and as McVeigh is backing toward him, he notices McVeigh has a bulge under his left jacket. And he reaches out, he grabs it. McVeigh said it's a gun and it's loaded, and Hanger has his gun next to McVeigh's head and says, "So's mine." And he relieved McVeigh of his gun, which was loaded with those rounds that can shoot through an armor vest. And so once he had that gun and a K-bar knife that McVeigh had hidden on his person, he took McVeigh into custody and took him to the Noble County Jail in Perry, Oklahoma. And so our investigator asked Hanger what happened to him. And he said, "I don't know. He may still be in custody, he may not." And so one of our investigators contacted Sheriff Jerry Cook and talked to him, and he said, "Well, McVeigh's in custody, but he's going to be released within probably an hour." And so we put a federal hold on him. And at that point, myself and several other agents got into a helicopter and flew up to Perry. And when we got up there, myself and another agent interviewed the different people that had been in McVeigh's cell. We were asking him questions, has McVeigh said anything? Did he comment about the bombing at all, anything of that nature? And they said no, he was just attentive to the radio that was giving updates on what was going on with the bombing investigation. And then finally, McVeigh was brought into an office that Sheriff Cook gave us, and I asked McVeigh, I said, "Do you know why we're here?" And he said, "That thing in Oklahoma City, I guess." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he said, "That bombing. I want an attorney." But one of the really beneficial things of Trooper Hanger taking him into custody was the fact that when they lodged him in the Noble County Jail, they collected all his clothing and put it in paper bags. Well, when we sent that clothing back to the FBI laboratory and they did a chemical analysis test on the clothing, they determined that he was basically the explosive equivalent of a powdered sugar donut. He had PETN all over his clothing. 5 years after the bombing, I brought my wife and children to the dedication ceremony of the memorial. And we could have gone in with Clinton, but we chose to go in with the victims. And I wasn't prepared for the emotional impact that hit me when we walked in there and I saw the people who had lost kids putting stuffed animals and flowers on the little seats. There's big seats for adults and little seats for the kids. And when they went in there and put the stuffed animals and the flowers on the little seats, I couldn't talk. I said, "I can't talk," and I just kind of walked on the hill by myself for a few minutes until I kind of composed myself. But it was so sad, what happened with those kids. it is still the defining moment in Oklahoma City. When you try to talk about when something happened, let's see, that was before the bombing, that was after the bombing. It's a measure of time like BC and AD. And, throughout the country, news stories went in different directions, and they didn't keep having that. But in Oklahoma City, they did.
Already been released. So they called the sheriff, Jerry Cook, who told them McVeigh was indeed still in custody, but only for about another hour. Immediately, they placed a federal hold on him, and Jim Norman, along with several other agents, flew by helicopter to Perry. When they got there, Jim and other agents interviewed people who had been in McVeigh's jail cell. They asked if McVeigh had said anything about the bombing, but the other inmates said no. He just seemed focused on listening to the radio for updates in the investigation. Eventually, they brought McVeigh into a room and Jim asked him if he knew why they were there. McVeigh simply replied that things in Oklahoma City, he guessed. Jim pressed further, what does it mean by that? And McVeigh said, that's bombing, he wants an attorney. Jim pointed out how important Trooper Hanger's arrest was, because when McVeigh was booked into jail, they collected all his clothing and stored it in paper bags. When that clothing was sent to the FBI lab and tested, the results showed explosive residue, specifically PETN, all over his clothes. Jim described it like McVeigh was the explosive version of a powdered sugar donut. He also shared something more personal. 5 years after the bombing, Jim took his wife and kids to the dedication of the memorial. They had the option of going in with President Clinton, but they chose to enter with the victims, and nothing could have prepared him for the emotion that hit when he saw parents placing stuffed animals and flowers on the smaller chairs, those representing the children who died. He said he couldn't talk, he just had to walk up the hill by himself to gather himself. The sadness, especially thinking about those innocent kids, was overwhelming. That moment, he said, still defines Oklahoma City. It changed everything, even how people marked time. They had said it became like Oklahoma City's version of before Christ and after death. And while the first of the century moved on, in Oklahoma City, that they never stopped shaping how people remember and live. As the time passes, Oklahoma City bombing remains an indelible chapter in the nation's history. The survivors, responders, and investigators who lived through that day carry with them a collective memory, a reminder of the fragility of life and the strength of the human spirit. The stories of courage, sacrifice, and compassion continue to inspire future generations. Oklahoma City, forever changed by the bombing, has become a symbol of resilience, where the Oklahoma standards lives on. Though the wounds of that day will never fully heal, the community's response, united in grief and determined to rebuild, ensures that the victims' memories and the fight for justice will never be forgotten.
Thanks for watching us today and for joining us on our journey of enlightenment. Morganable, the vehicle of enlightenment.